Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Welcome, Treasurer Ma. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you, Alan.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Alan Greenlee, and welcome everybody to SCAMP's first Hauser's Hour session of 2021. It's a recurring series where we get the chance to engage directly with elected officials and public agency leaders to get pressing questions answered. We'll regularly convene Hauser's Hours to give SCAMP members access to affordable housing decision makers. And today's audience members will learn about top goals and priorities for the Treasurer's Office, as well as issues concerned with the Tax Credit Allocation Committee and the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee. And with that, we're pleased to introduce today's featured speaker. Speaker is State Treasurer Fiona Ma, CPA. Treasurer Ma is the 34th State Treasurer in California and was elected in November of 2018 with more votes than any other candidate for treasurer in state's history. She's the first woman of color and the first woman certified public accountant elected to this position. In her role, she is the state's primary banker. Her office processes more than $2 trillion in payments each typical year and provides transparency and oversight for all investment portfolio, which is over $124 billion. She also oversees TCAC and CIDLAC, as we mentioned before, the two committees that play a critical role in financing low-income housing in California by allocating state and federal tax credits and bonds. So please, I'm very pleased to welcome Treasurer Ma, and we're going to give you a few moments to make some opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan, for having me here today, and I look forward to our discussion here. I'm going into my third year as the state treasurer, and I have to say that I have learned a lot, especially last year, thanks to COVID and our ability to, or inability to travel. I have really spent a lot of time with all of my divisions and BCAs, especially TCAC and CIDLAC over the last year. I think I chaired 18 CIDLAC committees last year and 11 TCAC committees. So I think I know a little bit more than I did pre-pandemic about our housing and our housing goals and everything we've been doing at TCAC CIDLAC, as well as working with our partners, CalHFA and HCD. So I look forward to this dialogue with you today.
Great, thanks so much. As I mentioned earlier on, I had a little technical difficulty, so I'm a little anxious here, but certainly looking forward to this conversation. We went out to the members over the course of the week last week as we were preparing for this event. And so we've got a number of questions. And the one thing I wanted to put up at the very front, our members are really in this business every day because they're into the idea of changing lives through provision of affordable housing to low-income people. And so the very first questions today are from residents. And they really are around the question of accessibility to information and decision-making at the treasurer's level and at TCAC CIDLAC level. And so I wonder if you could respond to one of our residents who said, gosh, I'd really like to be involved in the way decisions get made at TCAC, but I feel like it's a little bit hard for me as an ordinary citizen to be able to engage. And so I wonder if you have comments about, how regular people can be involved in the business of affordable housing finance at the state level.
Sure. We get a lot of correspondence from all constituents on so many issues, a lot having to do with tenant landlord issues, especially when developers are able to increase the rents to fair market value. We have a case going on right now where we are talking to the developer and the management company about their increase in rents. So I encourage folks to continue to email, call us. I have a dedicated email address, especially through COVID. It's askfiona@treasurer.ca.gov. And I think another silver lining about COVID is that our meetings have been virtual. So as you all know, you probably log into all of the CIDLAC TCAC meetings. I have made a tremendous effort to make sure our agendas are posted within the 10-day period. They weren't always done that way before. If you look on the website, all the minutes are pretty much transcribed word to word, word for word, because some people that are trying to go back and figure out and follow what's going on may not be able to unless it has more detail than less. So we have really made an effort to do that. I think one meeting was 55 pages for our minutes. So we really want folks to follow us, to sign on at meetings, to give public comments. And I also put together a 30-person working stakeholder group. And these are actually some of your members and developers that are working around the state that represent all the tenants that are living in their properties. So I think there's a number of tenant engagement opportunities, and certainly, as you all have known, working with me, you know, I come to all of these events. I try to be as transparent as possible, coming from local government. And before that, working for Senator John Burton as a constituent representative, I know how important it is to respond to constituents, especially when things are happening that are impacting their lives, that we need to be very diligent and quick and efficient, and to make sure we get back to people to alleviate their concerns and their fears and their angst. And so I'm very, very sensitive about that. But thank you for the question, and we look forward to getting feedback from any constituent, anytime, through any means. And we are very, very responsive. If you call my phone, someone will pick up, take a message. If you email, you should get a response back, especially if you have a specific question that you want us to either address or to resolve for you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Treasurer. That, you know, that it's often easy to forget. And I bet certainly if you're dealing with hundreds of billions of dollars, you know, sometimes it's easy to forget that we really are at this work for a very specific purpose. And so appreciate the work that you've done on that, and look forward to continue to work on better resident engagement and input. You know, last year, the legislature, among other things, passed a bill called AB 434, which talked about consolidating some of the HCD programs. And I wonder if you have anything to say about sort of how that progress is going, what we might have learned so far in some of that work.
Yeah, so we just had a briefing workshop with Gustavo Velazquez and his team about the AB 34 bill and what they are doing to align their 6 major programs in particular. And you all probably know it, but just to reiterate, it was a daily bill asking or mandating that the 6 multifamily programs under HCD incorporate new threshold and rating and ranking criteria and ensure consistency amongst the programmatic requirements. And so those programs are the multi-housing program, the MHP program, Veteran Housing and Homeless Prevention Program, CERNA Farm Working Housing Grant Program, Transit Oriented Development Program, Infill Infrastructure Grant Program, and Housing for Healthy California Program. And what I really like about this bill and the accomplishments that HCD is making is that they are going to go out with a supernova. Their expected ETA date is February 2022. And if you apply for one or more or all of the programs, HCD will evaluate your program. They will let you know at one time whether you qualify for one or all or whatever you're applying for. And then once you get that letter from HCD, you can come to CIDLAC and TCAC and apply for tax credits and bonds. So right now, it's a little bit disjointed, right? The programs all have different, you know, timelines and due dates, and so it's very hard for some of your members to have to put together all of the different funding sources before they're able to come to TCAC and CIDLAC. But thanks to AB 34, you'll be able to get one letter and you'll be able to come directly. And I think that is going to make a huge difference for many of your members who seek a lot of different funding sources.
Great, thank you. I also noticed that in the chat, there's been some stuff posted about how to keep track of what's going on at TCAC and CIDLAC. So we'll make sure that our audience members have access to that information, recalling back to the previous question.
Okay.
I wonder, so you talked about 434, and I know that the housing department had proposed, and in fact had paused some of its funding activities. I wonder if you could reflect on that process, and do you think that's been helpful at the work of trying to align the housing department and your agency's work?
Yeah, so housing and community development, as you know, is under Gustavo Velasquez, and that is under the governor's office. But he does report at public meetings. We do briefings and try to better align with each other. So I know that last year they did pause certain programs, certain NOFAs, to get a handle on how much money is left in the program, who is in the pipeline, who wants to apply, for example. And so I know that Gustavo was really trying to get his arms around the 6 programs and how much capacity we have and how much need or demand there is in the marketplace. So that's what he said publicly, but you probably have to invite him to maybe your next Hauser Hour to ask him for more details.
Great, thank you. I'm going to transition to some of the stuff that's happening with the regulations. I want to talk about the regulations. I want to talk about the backlog of bond capacity in the CIDLAC deals. But I'm going to hold on those for a second. And just acknowledging that there are already a couple of questions in the comment that we will come back to. One of which is already sort of choreographed in my prepared remarks. So I'll get to that. So please continue to put your questions in the question and answer section. But for our next question, Treasurer, I wanted to talk about your work and your interest in building housing that's affordable to students at community colleges and on community college land. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you found in that work and how do we facilitate the activity of being able to create housing on that kind of land?
Yeah, so I want to thank SCAMP for convening a number of roundtables, one in Southern California before publishing the report. And then we just recently had one in Northern California talking about the need for student housing on community college sites. We are going to be going out to market later on this year for our first project, Santa Rosa Community College, to build student housing on their land. And I really do think there is a great need for student housing, especially to community college students. But the trick or the difficulty really was in guaranteeing that, that rental income, since community college students, are transient. They come for a 2-year period normally. And so having that guaranteed rent was a risk for developers. And so the state, I believe that there's a difference between the private sector and the public sector. Private sector does certain things well, and the public sector does things well. And being government, we could take a little bit more risk than the private sector. And so I'm very, very happy that my California School Financing Authority really put on their thinking hats and trying to be creative and fill this niche. So I'm hoping that more community colleges will approach us with land. I know we have a number of different meetings as we're talking about these type of projects, whether it's for student housing or teacher housing, that there is interest with many of the community colleges. Only 100 out of 115 community colleges, only 12 have some sort of housing, either for students or teachers. So there's probably a lot of need and greater capacity. And so I hope we are going to be doing more of it in the future.
Terrific. Actually, as a follow-up to that, somebody asked about this idea of, given the way we've adjusted our behavior related to the pandemic, and a lot of stuff happening like this conversation virtually, has that really changed at a fundamental level the nature of education, and will we actually need that kind of housing at institutions of higher education? Have your studies, or do you have anything to say about sort of the nature of housing need at educational institutions?
Well, I think at the beginning, many of us, myself included, even though I was at work every day, but we were able to put most of our team on laptops, thinking that that's going to be the new, wave or the new trend. But as the years or, the year has gone by, I think many people have seen the benefits of coming to an office, for example, and being able just to walk down the hall and take care of, your question, or being able to brainstorm with someone instead of having to set a time to get on a Zoom call, to have an official meeting. So in terms of efficiency and also camaraderie, seeing my colleagues back is, it's amazing, because we've only been doing this, for the last year. Similarly, for education, I think we see that parents really want their young kids to socialize and to go back into the classrooms. It's very, very hard to learn on Zoom. Similarly, as you get older, I think when you are in a classroom situation with your teacher right there in front of you, your concentration is better. I don't know how many of you are on these Zoom calls and you turn off your camera and you're doing something else or multitasking like many of us. So I do think that it's good to have in-person learning whenever we can, but obviously it's up to the individual institutions in terms of what is going to work for them.
Yeah, terrific. You mentioned early in your term that homeownership as a method for wealth building for Californians was really important. And we noticed that in the governor's budget, I believe the mortgage credit certificate program was actually zeroed out. And if it wasn't zeroed out, it was significantly cut. I wonder, does your department and the agencies associated with it have any plans for the mortgage certificate program as a way to create homeownership opportunities in the places in the state where that's possible?
Yeah, no, we've had a discussion on the MCC program. However, the emphasis over the last 2 years is really on new construction, making sure that we allocate as much tax credits and bonds to new construction. That is the governor's edict in his executive order to build 3.5 million homes by 2025. And for many, new homes means new construction. And I'll give you an example. Out of $4.3 billion in bond cap, only 600 million out of the 4.3 billion is going for non-housing projects. And that is for garbage, recycling, wastewater, the high-speed train from Victorville or Rancho Cucamonga to Victorville to Las Vegas now. That's it. And the MCC program, unfortunately, is not the most efficient use of the bonds. However, if the federal government allows us to change the formula from 50% to 25% for the bonds, then we'll be able to fund more programs. And I hope that we will again be able to fund the MCC program, our tax exempt bond issuance other than housing, as well as ACT Rehab. We really have not been funding any of the acquisition rehab. And as those buildings age and get closer to converting to fair market value, those are assets that we really need to think about and preserve for affordability. So I'm hoping as the federal government helps us with some of these reforms, we're working really hard on them, especially through our agencies and the National Association of State Treasurers, to change that 50% to 25%, be able to use revolving bonds, for example, and also whether we can buy or trade, whatever, with other states that are not using their tax credits and bonds, because there are states that are not using it. And why not, if states like us in New York have projects, we'd like to be able to utilize all of it. Also, I was on the earlier today, and Apple provided a $2.5 billion credit facility for housing. $1 billion is going to go for home ownership opportunities through our CalHFA department or agency. So we have first-time home buyer programs through CalHFA, and now with another $1 billion in credit facility from Apple, hopefully more people are going to be able to become homeowners. And I've also been issuing bonds. I issue all the bonds for the state for the CalVet program. So for home ownership for veterans is also a program that has been funded again.
Right. Terrific. That's great news from Apple. It's really great to see the private sector step in when they do, and able to marshal resources that are pretty significant. $1 billion for home ownership, for example, sounds like a great news. So you alluded to this a little bit in your previous response, talking about bond cap room. And as you're well aware, there's a bunch of affordable housing deals across the state that are coming through your office through the 4% in bond strategy. But for the first time in many people's memory, if ever, the state has reached the limit of its bonding capacity. And so that's really the pinch place where we create a backlog of our ability to finance at the state level affordable housing deals. So I wonder if you might be able to speak for a moment about your plans about how to deal with that backlog of deals.
Yeah. So first off, I want to thank Governor Newsom for allocating $500 million in state low-income housing tax credits in the last fiscal year, as well as this fiscal year. And as you know, the 4% has to be matched up with the bonds. And after many decades, it is now a competitive program. So this week, tomorrow, I think we had 160 applications come in for the first round, and we're only able to fund 26. We heard last year, we tried to push some of the projects and expedite them faster because of COVID and our concern that local governments were closed and banks were closed and people weren't going to be able to get their financing. So for some of the shovel-ready, financing-ready projects, we did go down the line and down the list a little bit more to try to give them the opportunity to be able to go to market. So this year, we didn't want to do that. So we allocated a certain amount to 3 rounds. And our first round, again, we had 160 applications and we're only able to fund 26 projects this round. We also have been making changes to our regulations. As you know, last year, we went through extensive regulation changes in TCAC and CIDLAC. And sometimes you don't get it right all the time. And so we have new regulation changes that are on our website that we will also be discussing at tomorrow's meeting. And then we're also proposing a tweak in the tiebreaker category since the first round didn't work out, I think, as some people thought it would, given what we passed back in December. And so we are going to propose a tweak, and we'll see whether the other board members also agree with us.
So I can't let you tease that and not for me not to follow up on it. So that, one of the many, this one came in many different variations around the tiebreaker and the idea that the Bay Area just basically didn't get awarded any projects last time around. And so there appears to be a handful of changes. The one that's most visible to a simple person like me is really the regional allocations amounts, where you basically have capped how much certain regions can be awarded. I wonder if you might take a moment just to talk about how you got to that as a solution and what you think its utility will be, and if you think that that's a permanent allocation or something you would do on a temporary basis. Yeah,
I mean, we've heard a lot of concern especially from three big city mayors, San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose, that they did not get an allocation in this first round. However, there have been two projects that are on the list for Santa Clara and one in Alameda County. The proposal was to reallocate some of the regional allocation. I think the Bay Area got 17% initially, and now we are proposing a 4% increase for them to 21%, and 1% would come out of other categories to see whether we could, equalize the situation. Big cities like Los Angeles, for example, did very well in the first round. They also have a tremendous amount of need, and the costs are higher given the city and just the reality of the situation. So we're gonna see whether it will equalize things a little bit for the next round, but stay tuned. If we're gonna make changes in this first round, then we may be making changes to the second round and the third round, because it sets a precedence to making sure the system works the best it can.
We appreciate that. I certainly, as somebody from Los Angeles, I'm happy to hear that you've internalized it's expensive to build here, and we have people of really low income. So that combination is a really difficult thing to not only regulate for, but also to build for. So
Exactly.
appreciate your the challenging position you're in on that. So while we're sort of on the question of TCAC and CIDLAC, do you expect to see any major changes in the TCAC regulations this time around?
Like I said, we welcome community input, stakeholder input. So to the extent that things need to be changed sooner than later, TCAC process is a little bit easier. It's more nimble. We can make changes internally. We can bring it to the board, open it up to public comment, and then approve it much quicker than on the CIDLAC side, which has to go to the Office of Administrative Law, which takes a lot longer. We are going to be coming out with new regulations for the new round of disaster credits. So last year, we had 9% disaster credits sponsored by Congressman Mike Thompson, about $98 million over the next 10 years. And we were really surprised that in the first round, we were oversubscribed 3-1. We thought we would have room to do 3 rounds, and lo and behold, in those 12 or 13 counties that were devastated by fires in 2017 and 2018, that there was so much need, and that there were shovel-ready projects. So that aside, Congress has again allocated more 9% tax credits to 22 counties that were devastated by fires in 2020. So if you do the math and you divide 22 by $80 million, it doesn't leave that much money per county. And so we are trying to figure out what is a fair allocation method. Last time we used homes destroyed, I think people still feel like if this is a housing program, we still have to take housing into account. But then where is the greatest need, right? A lot of it was land fires, on federal property last year. So we're really trying to figure out, and if anybody has any good ideas, to please let us know. But that is going to definitely be a reg change for TCAC coming up very soon. I think we're going to have a May meeting to discuss some of the proposals, and then we will be putting it out to public comment for your feedback.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I think some of these questions might come in the form of a question, but might be proposals too. So
Okay.
One of them, for example, is, TCAC has a requirement that when you're awarded credits, you have 180 days to pull your permit. And there have been significant delays and slowdowns associated with the pandemic and other economic conditions. And the question here asks whether you'd be willing to consider some adjustment to that 180-day period.
Yeah, absolutely. I think last year you could see our office made a lot of accommodations depending on feedback that we heard. For example, one group said, hey, we can't do audits, right? We're not in the office, you know, and your team wants to come and do an audit, but we're not allowed to be in the office. Can you suspend in-person audits? So we said, okay, good idea. We'll suspend in-person audits. Another recommendation that came was about paperwork and why do we have to have a wet signature for every tenant when everybody's going to electronic signatures? And we're like, great idea. We should be doing that. So any way that we can accommodate all of you, you know, we don't want to be a barrier to housing. We don't want to stop housing. We don't want to slow it down. And since the pandemic started, I personally have been chairing every meeting, like I said, to make sure that we continue to update our regs, to roll out, you know, the tax credits and the bonds, because if government, we shut down, then everything shuts down. So we have been very consistent to have a skeleton crew here. Board members and the public have been able to, you know, call in virtually. But here at the Treasurer's Office, I'm very proud that all of our programs have continued to meet deadlines and to create innovative loan programs or grant programs and to accommodate, especially at TCAC and CIDLAC. We have really gone above and beyond. And if there's anyone that says that we haven't, please let me know, because we really, really try to keep housing going even during the pandemic.
Terrific, thanks. Certainly, we'll be giving you people's direct phone numbers if they've got any beef on that.
Sure.
On the TCAC side, another question that's come in fairly consistently is whether you'll be considering updating or minimizing or even removing the TCAC regulations around requiring soft money from local municipalities and county government.
Again, so we really turn to the stakeholder group, about 30 individuals who have been giving us feedback and really providing the framework or the blueprint on regulation changes and the allocations and the tiebreaker. And when the group cannot come to consensus is when we make decisions at the board. So soft money is still getting preferential, you know, points for having soft money, and I think that is not going to change.
Okay, thank you. This is slightly federal. You alluded to it in one of your responses, but the question is: President Biden signed the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan that will provide a pretty significant amount of money for the state of California. And wondered what your opinions are with respect to how to prioritize those funds.
Yeah. So some of you may know Tim Schaefer, my deputy over finance, and he has been stressing the importance of infrastructure. And now that we have money, he is going to put together our top 10 recommendations for how the infrastructure money should or could be allocated. So to the extent that you all have recommendations, I know I've been trying to refill our brownfield remediation fund. I know that there's a great need for infrastructure for new single family homes. Many have received all of the entitlements. However, local governments do not have the money to put in the underground or the above ground infrastructure. And therefore, many of them are just, you know, languishing right now, just waiting for that extra infusion. I know that there is a need for either overpasses or underpasses under train tracks. That's always right. If you're going to build more housing and bring more people, you need to either expand the roads or you need to put underpasses or overpasses over the railroad tracks. So there's a lot of big projects that could use significant amounts of the infrastructure grants funding. But again, we look to you. If you guys can give us your top, 10 good uses for infrastructure, we are compiling the list right now.
Great, thank you. I assume that over the 5 or so years you've been doing this work, I know that you specifically laid out in the early days this question of cost containment, and that the assembled panel of folks who've been working on the regulations for monies that come through your agencies have really looked at cost containment. Do you have anything to say about so the areas where you think there's the most ability to make progress on cost containment?
Yeah, so anyway, it's only been 2 years, Alan, not
Well,
5.
they said in the 2 years that you've been in this job, I
Thank you.
apologize, gosh.
Thank you. 2 years, short 2 years.
No.
AB 101 was passed and signed by the governor, mandating cost containment. And I'm not a builder, I'm not a financer, I'm, the treasurer, and I really have looked to the community. We did 5 housing listening tours right when I first got elected, and then certain cities said, how come you didn't come see us? And then a couple months later, we did another 10-city listening tour around this. What can we do in terms of cost containment? What should we be doing? We've had a lot of feedback that came through. And again, when we look internally to our stakeholder working group, they're the ones that really tell us, hey, some things, it's great if we pass all of these great mandates, right? Because we're California, but it's like a Christmas tree. When you have too many ornaments on a Christmas tree and your Christmas tree gets smaller, well, what does it mean? It means like everything is lopsided or not able to, stand straight, and you have to start picking, which ornaments can stay on. So we spent a whole year going through a lot of those requirements that have passed and said, hey, if we're going to really build housing at scale as efficiently as possible, according to what the governor wants, we need to figure out what we need to put on hold for now so that we can move, the pipeline and get the pipeline funded. So I can't say if there's one specific thing or 2 specific things. I mean, we've brought them to the board and, sought community input. But again, the stakeholder working group has been instrumental in telling us what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So I'll give you one example. If you're building disabled senior housing, why do you need a full working kitchen, like with a stove? When, as people get older, I live with my dad at 85, I prefer him not to use the stove. Microwave is okay. So developers have told us, that adds an extra X amount of cost, and it would be great if we could, either rework the regulations or suspend that requirement. So those are just some examples that have come through, but I can't tell you like 1, 2, or 3 things, but it's a combination of many things.
Thank you. Yeah, that's certainly it's just a tough call, right? It's hard to justify the total development costs and the sort of the court of public opinion, and but the details matter, right? It is expensive, takes a long time to get things done, and I think that we all need to be open-minded about what changes are possible. I think that sort of is true for all of us, including the development community. So here's one from an attendee asking if the second round of deadline for CIDLAC is going to get pushed back this year.
Not that we are planning at this moment.
Not planning on that. Okay. Great. Let's see. For regulation changes, next round, will CIDLAC and TCAC add a homeless priority for projects with 50+ units?
I'm sorry, one more time.
The question is, will the TCAC CIDLAC regs add a priority for homeless developments that have 50 or more units?
I don't think that's a specific requirement, but with No Place Like Home funding, I know there's more housing that's going to serve formerly homeless individuals. And also, since I come from San Francisco, and SROs are an important part of our housing stock, especially when people are leaving homelessness and moving to their first home. SROs are very, very important. So we've added the SRO category back as a category that could receive credits or bonds. Also, Nancy is on the call, Nancy Robles, who is the ED for CIDLAC and TCAC. And when you asked me about pushing back the deadline, I know that there was a coordination for timing. Nancy, if you could put in the chat, I know we were going to push back one of the dates a week, and I can't remember if it was the CIDLAC or the TCAC deadline. So I'm just thinking that I may have misspoke. So I'm going to have Nancy put in what we're proposing.
Terrific, thank you. And welcome, Nancy. We haven't had a chance to meet her, but look forward to that opportunity soon. And actually, so maybe you could talk a little bit about that. The idea that sort of consolidating both TCAC and CIDLAC functions under one boss
Yes.
is a new approach. Can you talk a little bit about how you did that?
Yeah. So, when I was running for treasurer, I met with all types of stakeholders and said, what should we be changing? Top level, and going down. And the recommendation was, why isn't TCAC and CIDLAC under one roof? Because they are so closely aligned. And it's like having two hands that are doing different things, and you can't ever bring them back because, they're just doing different things. So now that we have one executive director, our deadlines are aligned, our definitions are aligned in the regulations. We have a joint application for the first time for TCAC and CIDLAC ever before. And I think the community is very appreciative of this type of alignment and efficiency. So it is working. It took me about 2 years to get it to this fruition. And we are right now going to be hiring a consultant, an outside consultant, to come in and let us know how we can officially align the program and then go back to the legislature next year and make some of the legislative changes.
Oh, terrific. That's helpful. So it took 2 years, but it felt like 6. So
It did.
Congratulations. Do you have any preliminary thoughts on further alignment and efficiencies that you'd like to consider before you get this consultant on board and take it to the legislature?
Not with TCAC and CIDLAC. I think we've done quite a lot in terms of, combining and more transparency and accountability, and obviously, reaching out and being able to get more input. Community input has been very, very helpful, but it also means our meetings are a lot longer, as you know, and that's okay with me. I tell people I'm not in a rush. Sometimes we've had 6-hour meetings, and it's okay because it's important. This is important work for all of us.
Well, great. Well, it looks like we've exhausted the questions from the group, and I've been through my list. I wonder if you had any thoughts you wanted to wrap up with?
Well, I think having a governor, Governor Newsom and myself, we got elected at the same time. We have been very, very focused on, keeping the politics out of the mission of building housing for all. And I appreciate the stakeholders for coming to the table and stepping up and volunteering your time and showing up and giving us feedback, because that has been very, very instrumental. The controller also is a voting member on both. And so she and Tony Sertich has also been a great partner in this effort. So I'm just very, very excited that I think for the first time we are moving in the right direction in terms of housing policy and financing to make it more efficient and effective for all of you, as well as for all the residents. So I'm just very, very excited. It's taken a little over 2 years, but I definitely see the light at the end of the tunnel.
That's great. So yeah, I actually see that the response on the timing, that the application in May would be due the 25th based on the committee's approval tomorrow. And let's see what else. Oh, there's a question here about the Apple commitment, but I'm going to give you a minute, since you talked to them just today about that, to look for more information. And I realize I'm free. Can you guys hear me okay?
So that commitment is going through CalHFA.
Okay. Terrific. Well, I think I'm freezing up a little bit, so I'm going to take a moment and express my appreciation on behalf of the members of the 5 Southern California counties down here, the members of SCAMP and others that joined the call today. Thank you, Treasurer Ma, for being available. Look forward to continue to work with you on making sure that as much affordable housing for as many poor people can be built as possible throughout the state of California, and really appreciate you taking the time today.
And we've hit record numbers last year in ELI and BLI housing units approved. So things are working.
I think Alan's computer froze, so we'll end it there. Thank you, Treasurer Ma.
Okay, thank you, Jeanette. Talk to you later. Be
Bye.
safe, everyone. Bye.